Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to our topic for March, Gen Z and loneliness. And we have one of my colleague friends, Dr. Megan Smith, teaching on this topic today. This is a topic of her expertise, and she'll share a little bit more about what she does here at UNC Charlotte and about this research that she's been involved with. And that I will just hand this over. We will be taking questions at the end, but you're also welcome to use the chat function as we are chatting today, and then I'll be glad to read out those questions to Megan as we go through. So thank you so much, Dr. Smith, for being with us today.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I appreciate your willingness to let me talk about loneliness. I am going to, first of all, talk about who I am. And one of the things that I talk about, which is the second to last point, which is that I welcome every opportunity to talk about loneliness. So I am an assistant teaching professor in sociology. This is a second career for me. And that is why loneliness matters to me in this scenario. I'm also affiliate faculty in gerontology, criminal justice, and social work. I teach classes mainly in the fields of mental health, criminology, deviant behavior, and loneliness. I actually teach a class on loneliness at UNC Charlotte that is cross-listed sociology, gerontology, and sometimes social work. I see my work as mainly being community engagement focused as an assistant teaching professor, but I have started doing some research recently on loneliness for aging adults in the prison system. And I am mainly student centered. And that's why when I give suggestions later on, that may make more sense as to why some of my small yet impactful, as the write-up wrote, that they're easy ways to help with loneliness in conjunction with career focus after college or graduate school. So I have a personal experience with loneliness. I got my MA from UNC Charlotte in the sociology department where I now work in 2011. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe you could be a sociologist, like as a real job. And I went to grad school, and all of a sudden I found myself reading and writing alone. And anybody who knows me, I see a lot of familiar names on the who have logged in. And if you know me, you know I've never been a stranger in my life. I'm very extroverted. And so the fact that I was by myself and not interacting with individuals a lot, I became very lonely, but no one ever asked me in terms of healthcare, what are your social connections like? They just kept diagnosing me with physical health conditions. I knew something was off, but I wasn't having severe mental health issues. So I knew that was not right. But I also knew that the physical health issues I was having were likely related to some feeling that I had. So I speak from a place where I really advocated to teach classes on loneliness, and I did so in 2018 for the first time, actually as an adjunct with Queens. So I was adjunct for 4 years at UNC Charlotte, and I'm finishing my fourth year as full-time faculty. My main message when I talk about loneliness is that you are not alone. And this is what I tell my students. This is what I tell my friends. This is what I tell anybody I talk to when I present about loneliness in a larger or a smaller group. Loneliness and anxiety have a way of making us think that we are alone in our experience, and we are not when it comes to loneliness. So I welcome every opportunity to talk about loneliness, and I'm not going to click on the hyperlink, but I set the career goal of being an expert on loneliness, and I recently did a interview with Spectrum News that I guess aired last week. So once you get this, you can click on that and see what I have to say about loneliness and also how it was edited. I think anybody who's been interviewed know that's the risk you're taking. All right, so what is loneliness? There are lots of definitions, but I had this as a module in my introductory course, which is Gen Ed on mental health. And so we do talk about loneliness in there, even though loneliness is not a mental disorder. But loneliness is a mismatch between the number of quality relations one feels that they have versus the number of quality relationships one thinks that one has. So a lot of people will say to me, well, Megan or Dr. Smith, I like to be alone. Everybody needs their people. Some people might need two people. And if they have two quality relationships in their lives, they're totally fine and feeling satisfied. But if one person moves away, they're going to feel lonely. I, on the other hand, need 25 people on speed dial available to me at any moment. And when I have 20 friends, I think that I am very lonely and feel sad in my apartment. So there are different thresholds for this. That's the second point. It's on a continuum or a gradient. These are subjective feelings. So someone could look at someone else and say, but I see that you're at these events all the time, and I see that you're doing this, that, and the other. We all know people like that. But there are different types of loneliness. If you don't feel like you're socially connecting with people, even if you're going to events, then you have some sort of emotional loneliness. You could have existential loneliness. And then the UK, who does an incredible job studying loneliness and has a minister of loneliness, as does Japan, they gather data and have come up with some other ideas around loneliness. And I actually had a student tell me this the other day. He said, I've decided to be on campus because when I come home at 5 o'clock, I don't know what to do with myself until I get up the next day and come back to campus. I feel really lonely and disconnected from people. There are people, I had a student not that long ago who was living in a suite with 4 other people. And he said, I'm just so lonely, Dr. Smith. And I said, have you tried talking to the people you live with? And he said, no, everybody just sort of does their own thing. So we're going to talk a little bit about why that's the situation with Gen Z. These are subjective, they're dynamic. We go through periods in life where maybe we don't need to have as many quality relationships, or there are personal circumstances that lead to that, but it's not static. It's not something that you experience at 20 and 40 and 60, most likely, because those are different periods and life stages in one's life where different types of events and relationships, et cetera, are happening. If you're asking about social isolation is the objective number of social ties that you have. We do not have that with our students because unless they're asynchronous online and living by themselves, our students are seeing other people. They're in our classrooms, so they are doing those types of things, even if they're commuter students. Solitude is the luxury of feeling socially connected, but choosing to spend time alone. So I can give my personal example. I love to travel to national parks. I don't often have service. I sometimes pretend like I don't have service because even as an extrovert and somebody who works really hard to have lots of social connections, because I know that I need them to feel fulfilled and feel like a whole person, sometimes I really do want to be by myself. So those are some terms that are helpful to understand. All right, the trends in loneliness. So we know that loneliness and feeling socially connected has been declining for decades. We can find this in the 1970s, the end of the 1970s. We start talking about relationships and health outcomes for feeling lonely, or number of relationships or number of quality relationships. And so this is not a new thing, even though it is a hot topic in the public discourse right now. During the pandemic, loneliness became a popular discussion in the public discourse. Why is that the case? Well, I can only surmise from all of the research and articles that I've read and all of the books, and listening to experts in presentations and on podcasts, is that you could not mask your loneliness anymore. You couldn't run to Target. You couldn't go out and do errands. You couldn't keep yourself busy in the way that one used to be able to keep themselves busy. And so then you really had to face facts that, wow, something is really going on here. Again, not experiencing mental health problems. So I do want to talk about that very briefly. When you are lonely, you are 4 times more likely to develop depression. A symptom of depression is socially isolating oneself. However, self-reports of loneliness, most people who say that they are lonely, based on the UCLA loneliness scale, which is the most commonly used, they are not depressed, nor have they had experience of depression. This is a separate experience, not a mental disorder or a mental health problem. So Gen Z, we know that Gen Z are all people that will be turning 13 to 28 this year. The self-reports of studies for Gen Z range anywhere from 61 to 79%. The next highest number are older adults at 45%. This is alarming. This is a call to action. This is an urgent problem because we're seeing it in our classrooms and we're trying to figure out how to take care of it. The behavior may seem erratic or unusual or very anxious in the tone of the emails and the way of communication, inviting people to come to your office hours and they don't show up. So there are lots of alerts and ways that you can recognize loneliness, even with the people you work with, quite frankly. If I get a very anxious email, and I think we all know what that really sounds like, the very first thing I say is, are you doing okay? Because most likely there's no reason anybody's going to get upset about sociology. I tell people that all the time. There's no reason to get upset in this discipline. So what else is going on? Why are they the loneliest generation by far? When you think about rates of 45% and then jumping to the lowest range of this is 61%, that's 16 percentage points. What is going on? All right, I will tell you. So we're seeing, let's just talk about number two, the second bullet point, because I think people automatically assume that social media is 100% the culprit. But it's not actually. We do have individuals doing long-term usage of technology. So that can be spending upwards of 6 hours on technology a day. That can be anything from doing their assignments, being a gamer, on social media, any sort of other social media platform that people interact with, even forms of chat rooms, spending time online shopping. When I was younger, because we didn't have we didn't have little computers on our phones, basically, I would call a friend for a recommendation of something. But now I might text someone and say, do you have a recommendation for a therapist? Do you know where I could get a green dress that I could wear to a function for UNC Charlotte? We are no longer talking to people. We don't need to ask people because we can Google it. So my sister, who is a millennial, one time said to me, did you even try to Google it? And I think about that all the time because those small interactions actually make a big difference. They have a compound effect. If we're not, meeting someone for coffee or seeing someone in class and leaning over and saying, hey, do you even know what we're talking about today? When you have those missed opportunities, that is how technology can be different. A student one time wrote in a reading log, Dr. Smith, how am I supposed to connect with people in my class when people automatically get on their phones the second they step up from their desks? That was years ago, and I still think about that. So, you know what? That was a really good point. Living alone, we have a lot of commuter students living alone. It's a sign of prestige and financial security to be able to live alone. The days of having lots of roommates have ended. A lot of people will also live with their parents as opposed to living with roommates that might say, oh, hey, let's go to this event or let's go to this party. Your parents aren't going to invite you to the party. Now, there are people that get along with their parents. That's not to say that those aren't quality relationships, but they don't integrate you into social networks or events. Also, Gen Z has a lot of transitions happening during this life stage. They're graduating high school. They are potentially going to college, community college, going to a trade school, moving away for a job, changing their friend, like leaving high school friends and making new friends, getting married, having children. There is a lot that happens between the ages of 13 and 27. And yes, I know the marriage rates and childbearing rates are much higher than they used to be. But in general, I'm hoping that you kind of get the picture that, when you're in your 40s, you're not quite having as many changes as someone who is 19. We also see decreased involvement in civic activities. That's across the board. There are a lot of dangers to decrease in civic activities. So this would be volunteer organizations, um, clubs based on gender identity, not going to religious services. These are places that people meet and have shared values and beliefs with people. And that can often lead to quality relationships in a different kind of way than, say, being offered extra credit for going to a documentary showing, right? Which obviously I have done before, and I'm sure other people have too. So, let's see. I've talked about all of that. Okay. Outcomes of loneliness for Gen Z. So we see a lot of outcomes over the life course for individuals. There are physical and mental health outcomes. So things like increased hypertension, strokes, chronic heart disease, weakened immune systems. If you're wondering why our students are getting sick all the time, and that's a problem because you can't miss work all the time or you don't get to keep your job. There are some studies that show that there might even be a linkage between social disconnection and cancer. Cognitive decline, mental health problems can be a result. As I said, you're more likely to have them, and anxiety. So what are the signs and symptoms? The number one symptom of loneliness is anxiety. I think we see it all over. We ourselves are experiencing it. So we're not living in a vacuum that is separate from the rest of the world, and we're experiencing this too. Demanding and critical behavior, which I sometimes see in students. That's also when I ask, is everything okay? Lack of confidence and self-esteem. Maybe you see more missed classes. An example of this is people who are lonely. Studies show that they may be invited places, and even though they have no other activity to do, they choose not to go. When I invite students to come back to class who may be using them, I say, we welcome you back to our classroom. What's going on? What is preventing you from coming? How can I help you remove that obstacle? They have no reason. They just don't come. But I think a lot of it has to do with anxiety. That is the symptom of loneliness. We also see the impacted development of soft skills, which are crucial to being successful in the career market upon graduating, or even during their time as a student. So I've just put this in AI, and it said the personal attributes, communication abilities, and interpersonal skills. So I have linked here to the Career Center webpage. Communication, teamwork, problem solving, and leadership. These are 4 out of the 8 career skills that are on a page in the Career Center. With our limited time, I'm also afraid to touch one and it go to something else or show you all of the tabs open on my computer. That might be indicative of my age, I must admit. So if you click on these, you can see there are 8 listed examples of communication. I've talked to Suzanne, and you are welcome to copy and paste them. And show students how to use that wording for their resumes, or when they're talking to professors, when they want to work on their research projects and gain experience, internships and gain experience with offices on campus, centers on campus, or within programs or departments. So, okay, how do we help students? All right, this is helping students prepare for success in the career of their choosing. We want to take advantage of our classroom opportunities. Number 1, service is the antidote to loneliness. In my class, we have 3 remote service volunteer opportunities a year in my classes. One time we write encouraging note cards to CMS students through Classroom Central. We also make bookmarks for promising pages with origami. And we also, this year we're going to work with a hospice center for craft activities. And that's the value of attending events to meet other people. I just met one of our partners in gerontology for that. Offering free rights. They're being talked to all day long. They're in larger classes, many of them, and they don't want to talk. They think they may sound silly. They're nervous. So asking them to do free write and think about what they've just heard Active listening is an example of a skill they need, and also critical thinking. What was I learning? How do I answer Dr. Smith's prompt? Utilize the career skills page after certain class activities. So I'll do a class activity and then we'll pull up the career center and I'll say, which of these eight things did you do today? Get out a Google Doc, write on your notes and phone or on your phone or put on a piece of paper. What are the things that you did here that you could include? Oh, it looks like we all did number 2, the second bullet point. This is something to include on your resume. I also set up situations where people collaborate in online classes. That is possible. So they're learning the skills of teamwork, collaboration, conflict resolution. When their peers don't show up, their immediate is to come to me to resolve it. But I'm trying to teach students to go to their peers and say, hey, I don't really feel like we're all on the same page. We need to kind of start working on this on Tuesday if it's due on Thursday. So teaching students those skills, giving them a confidence boost. You can do this. And then small group discussions during class time. So in my loneliness class, one of the activities that we do is just get in a small group and I give them a prompt or ask them to talk to each other. The number of times I've done group activities and afterwards I ask if anybody knows anybody else's name in the group, I'm not even going to tell you. It's concerning. People don't even think to introduce themselves. So by having just small group discussions about anything, I had a loneliness class and one time I overheard a student say, "What state is everyone from?" And what that signaled to me is that he had been thinking about questions he could bring to these small groups and be prepared just to talk about something. And when they have interviews, they need to be able to know how to have those conversations, to look someone in the eye, to be prepared, like around professionalism, show up prepared, writing professional emails. If they have low self-esteem and confidence, that is really difficult to do. Number 2, familiarize yourself with the Career Center services. I have a student, Dr. Smith, I'm in active addiction. I'm dealing with depression and anxiety. I feel very alone, and I'm very afraid I'm not going to get a job. Well, I called the Career Center and said, how can you help with the situation? They have a disability. And I found out that someone named Caroline Rogers actually works with students who have disabilities. Especially if it's physical and it's outward, students can be very anxious about that and applying for jobs. And the student sent me an email back because Caroline was amazing. The same day she sent an email, I'm going to say within hours. And he said, Dr. Smith, today is the first day I have felt hope in a long time. Look, I'm not a magician, but it does make a difference because he probably wouldn't have had the confidence to say, can you help me? Or wouldn't have known how to ask it. So just kind of helping in that direction starts giving students hope, confidence, etc. Invite the Career Center to come to the classroom to prepare and ask students to prepare a question that they have to ask if they want to get credit for coming to class that day. Also, I have seen Suzanne come to a student club meeting, and that was very informative because it was targeted at a specific discipline. Create a class activity that requires students, I'm being mindful of my time, which is why I'm talking like those micro mini cars guy did in the 80s, if anybody remembers him. Create class activity that requires students to interact with the Career Center. I always admire people when they say, oh, I do a scavenger hunt as the first activity in the classroom and they have to go all over campus. And I'm like, I cannot wrap my head around that, but it sounds really cool. So if you are one of those people that can do that, ask them to go to the Career Center. Maybe they need to get informational material. They need to talk to someone specifically. That would be a great way for them to interact with the Career Center. Ask them to develop a LinkedIn page. The Career Center can help students do this. I ask students to follow me on LinkedIn. When we have events, I tag them in photos and then show them how to repost those photos on their own feed. And then I encourage them to post. Y'all, we went to the conference today. I saw, here are some pictures. Let me email them to you. I can't wait, tag me in them so I can repost them. So teaching students to do that, I wouldn't say I'm having a ton of luck, but I've just started this and how to talk to students. I think we're going to go somewhere with this eventually. Mentorship on an honors or capstone project. I would imagine a lot of people on this call are doing that. So after, or, when we're getting close, or even at the end of a semester, because I know that it's a process over multiple semesters, I set up a meeting with that student to talk about the skills that they are learning in an honors and capstone project and ask them to go ahead and put that on their resume. And I just, say, I'll sit right here while you do that. And then we can go through these. Do you think you've learned this? Do you think, we'll have the computer screen up. Do you think you've learned this? I suggested to someone for number two, invite students to participate in community work you're leading. I invited students just to be on a panel for Mental Health Awareness Month, which is in May, and I'm working with a group of people. These students are speaking on the panel. I talked to them about what an invited talk was. Then I sent them a link to Al Purdue so they would know how to cite the invited talk. Then people said, I'm a little confused about, then we can answer the question. Go ahead and create a Google Doc. Come to a presentation I'm giving. That can count as professional development, and you can put that on your resume. Um, I I always ask people that I know in the community, hey, do you need an intern? The number of students who say to me, I am trying to volunteer somewhere and I can't get anyone to respond to me. I'm always like, well, I've got somebody you can work with. And I reach out to that person. We talk about how do you write an email? How do you behave as an intern, etc. All right, encourage networking on campus events. The other day I went to an event and the student came and she said, I'm really nervous, but this is the field I want to get into. And I said, there's a woman over there in the red skirt and she is also very nervous about being here and she's from hospice. I said, why don't you go talk to her? And then she kept saying, I know I can do this. I know I can do this. And I was like, of course you can. And I saw them later talking together. We often assume that someone else is more confident, is not feeling anxious, is socially connected, and knows what to do and say, when indeed that's actually not the case at all. Conference attendance. So they get, they're socially disconnected. They're not quite sure what to say. They're learning something for the first time. They haven't had a lot of opportunity for small talk, which conferences often are. So, I met with 3 students that we took to the North Carolina Sociological Association, and we talked about professionalism before we went. What do we wear? What do we say? What do we take with us? And then how to actively participate in a conference. So I took a student, she rode with me, next one, offered to give them a ride. And then she rode with me and she was kind of like, didn't want to get too far away from me. But then I saw her later and she said, oh, I learned a lot about XYZ because I talked to somebody after they gave their presentation. This is what we want in terms of helping them build their skills for afterwards. Share your CV with students. I send it to them all the time. Hey, these are some sections. See what they look like. See what you can add. What else are you doing outside of campus? And then my last one, of course, is encourage support. And there's never enough of that. Remember, they are new to their career and they are new to college, and they're also very socially disconnected. So they're already dealing with potentially some health issues, some mental health challenges, or experiencing a lot of anxiety or those other symptoms of loneliness. If we encourage and support them, I have been amazed at how they have risen to the occasion when we believe that they can rise to the occasion. All right. I saw a lot of questions.
You do have some questions, and I'll be glad to read them out for you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. One question is about one of your earlier slides, when you talked about loneliness declining. How do we create urgency in addressing this issue from a holistic perspective?
Declining. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. It's been increasing over decades. First of all, that's a
Oh,
typo.
gotcha.
Okay, but how do we approach this from a holistic perspective? I think talking about it. Now, I talk about topics where students are coming in. There's a lot of crying in my office. So I am already a person that's talking to people about it, about loneliness, mental health. But I will say that bringing it up in class, it doesn't matter what the discipline is. It doesn't matter. I mean, seminars and pro seminars obviously are great places. UCall classes are great places to do that. But just to let people know what it is, to let them know they're not alone, to show them a resource, which I have done on the very last slide. Right here in this hyperlink, Our Epidemic of Loneliness gives ideas for what educators can do in talking to students. And then I always say to students, I hear that you're feeling lonely. How can we comprehensively at UNC Charlotte help you? Because doing extensions is a band-aid. Let me start connecting you with people. Does this take a lot of time? Yes. It does. It does take a lot of time. But when I think about holistic, I think about the comprehensive way that Charlotte likes to take care of students and support them. So a care and concern is helpful. Following up with students, did you answer the care and concern? And then providing resources and announcements, having a separate module in your Canvas class that has resources can also be helpful.
Megan, that's actually all the questions in the chat. We had some really great conversation going on about mentorship, scavenger hunts, and other resources that people wanted to share. So does anyone else have questions? You're welcome to put them in the chat or turn on your microphone.
I have a comment. I just want to thank Megan so much for this work, for normalizing the conversation about loneliness. I think there can be a lot of shame around it, and just getting people talking. It's so appreciative.
Thank you, Amy. And that is why I think it's important for us to also talk about our own experience with loneliness if we've had it. Um, in terms of like belonging stories, if anybody remembers when we did the PERTS study that's going on at Charlotte, and belonging stories help students realize that we are also human and that we may have experienced this or felt this at times in our lives. The biggest advice I can also say is encourage people to start small. And one of the best examples from one of the books that I've included as a resource is just start talking to the cashier. Make sure you know your neighbors. That's easy small talk. I now stand at the door and no one is allowed to leave until they say goodbye to me. And now we're moving on to making eye contact. And when they don't, I kind of like do that to make sure. So those are small skills. And they now, every class waits for me. And I say goodbye to every single person as they leave my class.
Megan, we got another question from Bethany. Can you review the key differences between solitude and loneliness?
Yes. So loneliness, again, is the like misalignment, the difference between the number of relationships that we have that we feel are quality relationships. A way to think about it, that is people with whom we can talk to about anything. Um, it is a subjective state that is difficult to admit to. Amy was just talking about the normalizing of it, because unfortunately, we as individuals have made a series of decisions that have put us in that place. If you are socially connected, which is obviously the goal in life in terms of health, you will die sooner if you are lonely. It's akin to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That is your life expectancy if you are lonely. That feels alarming and a call to action to me. And solitude is, hey, I'm socially connected, but I'm choosing to spend time alone. I'm going to go on this individual vacation. You know what? I'm going to go to this conference by myself and also enjoy that time by myself.
Andrew, would you like to turn on your mic?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Smith, for your presentation. Really got a lot out of it. I want to ask about the connection between social media or technology use on the one hand and loneliness and anxiety and depression on the other. So I recently read Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, which I highly recommend to everybody. I found his thesis pretty compelling, that there's a line that you can draw to connect the dots between smartphone technology and what he calls like a phone-based childhood, and the rise in measurable anxiety and depression, hospital visits, those sorts of things among the generation attending college right now. But you mentioned that social media or technology are kind of one among many factors. So can you talk about kind of where that fits in? Because, you know, I want to recognize that as an important factor, but you know, where it's positioned in this broader mix of factors is something I want to understand too.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for a great question. So I think our automatic go-to with anything that's sort of going wrong in society is it must be social media. And we know from studies we have, however limited, because social media technology is so new that we really don't have a ton of data. We do know that social media platforms can provide affirming communities for people. So individuals who live in areas where people are not like them or don't have the same interest as them, they can really find a connection online. Also, they can sort of be a different person. They can be more social and extroverted online, and then you meet them in person, and it's just like the words don't come out. So the reason I mentioned that and that I didn't put it at the top is because collectively research around on loneliness shows there are multiple factors. Does it make individuals anxious? Yes, they're being bombarded with images. There's the comparison epidemic. It makes people feel very depressed and anxious, but it doesn't always make them feel lonely because in their minds, they feel like they're connected to people, even when they're not. Also, when we are in person with people, our bodies release a particular hormone that makes us feel a connection in ways that social media doesn't. So those other factors are also important. And it's, yeah, that would be my only thing is I don't want to blame everything on social media because there's so many other social factors that contribute to why people are lonely and feeling alone. Also, they're getting inputs from modeled behavior from other people as well. During childhood, we get that. In schools, we get that. In other social institutions, people are modeling behavior. But I do think that the anxiety, which is the number one symptom of loneliness, it explains a lot of people's behavior right now because the idea of being lonely, there was a study with a vignette and people didn't know they were answering about loneliness, but they made the correlation. They gave people a vignette and said, there are a group of teenagers on a basketball court. What do you think they're doing? And they noticed there was a correlation between people who were lonely, who immediately assumed that something scary was going on and they were feeling anxious about it. People who were not lonely were like, they're a bunch of high schoolers on a basketball court. So this idea of, seeing certain things on social media that might be scary or producing fear in individuals, and you're already anxious and uncertain. Again, I feel like this explains a lot about our social world at the moment.
Thank you so much. That's fascinating.
Yeah, hopefully that answered it.
Yeah.
Megan, we have one more question. Is there any documentation that's required when, I guess, talking with professionals, maybe future employers? If so, what does that look like? For instance, if someone does have an anxiety diagnosis that might lead to loneliness.
So if someone is experiencing depression or anxiety, isolating themselves socially is a symptom, but it's not the same thing as loneliness. But if they are experiencing high levels of anxiety that are separate from social disconnection, obviously ADA, Americans with Disability Act, is important to have. Now, I went to, Gina, that's exactly what I was thinking. I went to a student panel on mental health, and I was pretty shocked at what students said. First of all, they thought we were out of touch and that we needed training on mental health. They said that professors were not accommodating. They said, somebody said, who was actually from UNC Charlotte on this panel, they won't talk to us about self-harm, which a lot of people do talk about in conjunction with loneliness. I prefer not to. It's just a personal opinion because there are lots of factors that go into suicidal behavior that are not always due to loneliness. That they don't want to tell the truth because we're a liability. I said, we're not afraid. We will help you. We document it. It's okay. Come and talk to us. We want to help you. So, oh my gosh, I think I lost track of the question. Is it in the chat?
Yeah, so is there any type of documentation that a student may need?
But under the ADA, they would have to have a letter from a doctor. That is a mandate and a requirement by the ADA. I personally would not use that as a reason when applying for a position, because automatically, unfortunately, it's going to signal that this person may be undependable, unpredictable, likely won't show up to work, won't have positive communication skills, may not work well together in a team. And that may not necessarily be true, because they are gaining life skills in which they may be able to do that once they're in a different setting and around people that know how to do those skills or have a mentor. You're welcome, Stephanie. She's in my department.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Gina.
So this is Gina from Disability Services. And so I think everything you're saying, Megan, is right on target, and Adrian's given some stuff in the chat. There are points at which a person with a disability should disclose disability in the interview process and in the job process. And there are multiple points depending on whether that disability is visible or hidden. Do you need accommodations for your interview? Very often, if you have anxiety, you don't need accommodations for your interview. You don't want to lead with, I have anxiety. But if you need an interpreter for your interview because you're deaf or hard of hearing, you're going to tell somebody up front. So there are points at which you reveal things. If you need accommodations in the workplace, you're going to talk with your HR department, right? On campus, if you need accommodations, you're going to talk to us in Disability Services, and we're going to help you know what to provide to your faculty so that you're not necessarily giving your faculty documentation. You might be reaching out to your faculty to say, I need some assistants, I'm really having a hard time. We hope that you direct them to us and or to DINA students, depending on what they've told you has happened. Something traumatic has happened and it affected me immediately today, or I have an ongoing something that is happening in my life. Those may be two different resources. Does that, and there is documentation for all kinds of mental health diagnoses that a professional can provide for a student to our office. We aren't going to give it to the faculty, but we will keep it here with us. Does that help?
Yes, I mean, I personally myself have accommodations as an employee, but loneliness is not going to be found in the DSM,
That's correct.
which is, yes. So in terms of diagnosis, you may talk to a healthcare provider about being loneliness and about being lonely, and they may give some suggestions. And I always encourage people to just ask questions or disclose a little bit in a trusted circle. I always say you will be surprised that other people, I myself have done that, and I've been shocked at people who are also walking around with these health issues in which they feel very alone in them. But then you also like are talking to this person rather frequently, and you both have similar situations. And in that sense, we can create empathy and compassion. And I think that loneliness, and then the symptoms of loneliness really require empathy and compassion. There's been a lot of talk in the public discourse about empathy is a weakness, and it is not. It is not. I tell my students this all the time. We are kind, we give grace to people, we don't know what's going on with them. So you still have to turn in your work, though, unfortunately, but in general, come and talk to me, because there might be a circumstance in which there's some extra assistance needed temporarily, and that's fine. And then when it's beyond my class, like, hey, you should really go talk to Disability Services, I will include that in my note for my care and concern. And then the Dean of Students does what they do about that.
All right, everyone. I know we could probably talk another 2 hours, but we are going to go ahead and wrap it up. This afternoon, I will be emailing everyone with this presentation today with some other resources that Megan will send, as well as her
Thank
contact.
you, Valerie.
But thank you so much, Dr. Smith, for being with us today. Can we give Dr. Smith a round of virtual applause? Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us, and just so exciting to have you here. I know this has been on our calendar for quite a while, and so excited to have you here to talk about this today. So thank you so much.